Hello, and welcome to Sacred Herbalism, the full moon segment of the Elder Tree podcast, where we explore how plants can support us to enter into a sacred relationship with life and the living world. I'm Stephanie Hazel, and I've recorded this episode beneath the gaze of epic Wollumbin, where I live in Bundjalung country, and I pay my respects to the First Nations people of this land, as well as to the spirits and plants of this ancient earth. If you love what we do, you can support the Elder Tree mission of putting medicine in the hands of the people by joining our Patreon, where you can access special teachings from our presenters and our interviewees. So, let's walk into the moonlit forest together. Are you ready? Good morning, dear Elder Tree community. Welcome to this full moon, super moon. What a moon that we had last night. I loved watching it rise through the forest, and I hope you found a moment to connect with this beautiful moon as well. So this month I'm doing something a little bit different. Again, about 4 years ago, I came across a piece of writing called How to Grow Liveable Worlds, 10 Not So Easy Steps for Life in the Planthropocene. It's written by an anthropologist, Natasha Myers. She is a Canadian woman. She's associate professor in the Department of Anthropology of York University. And I read this piece of writing and it completely infiltrated my heart, shall we say. It has continued to ripple out into the way that I see what's happening in the world. I see the relationship between plants and humans. And there are some statements that she made in that essay that have really marked me, and so I want to share it with you. I reached out to her a few years ago for an interview because she's an amazing thinker, but she's on medical leave. And even though we had a great chat on Zoom, cup of tea, and she's a really interesting woman who is starting plant listening communities and circles and doing work that really lights me up, she didn't feel up for doing an interview. So I suggested that I read this piece of writing to you all. I've mentioned it multiple times in different interviews along the way, and I'm just curious to know if this resonates with you as well. So I'm not going to read this piece of writing word for word. Almost, I'll be close to it, but I will adapt it slightly for the spoken voice. And I'm going to give some commentary at the end of it to each point. So she makes 10 points, 10 not so easy steps for life in the Planthropocene. But perhaps before we start, the Anthropocene is a term given by scholars for the world we live in now, where the shape of the earth has been molded by human technology and human designs. So Earth's history is divided into a series of chunks of time called the geologic timescale. And these time divisions are called eons, eras, or epochs. And they're generally classified by the Earth's strata or rock layers and how this changes. So officially, the current epoch is called the Holocene, which began 11,000 years ago after the last major ice age. But more and more scholars, anthropologists, and science are using the term Anthropocene, saying that around the 50s, we changed from the Earth's surface being dominated by the movements of ice flows 11,000 years ago, and now it's being formed and shaped by human activity. Natasha Myers is proposing that we need to get out of the Anthropocene and move into the Planthropocene, which she's saying is a kind of symbiotic collaboration between the plant world and the human world. That's kind of the context and the background of this piece of writing. Anthropocene, anthropos meaning man or human, and scene meaning changes. All right, let's get started. So here is Natasha Myers' article, How to Grow Liveable Worlds, 10 Not So Easy Steps for Life in the Planthropocene. What follows are the tendrils of a project I am calling Seeding Planthropocenes, taking the utterly absurd form of a step-by-step guide to getting out of the Anthropocene. This project picks up recent calls for inventive forms of speculative fabulation. This form does well to channel both my rage about our current predicament and my playful and loving, if also serious, aspirations for dreaming worlds otherwise. This is not so much an essay as it is an incantation. We must remember that we are living under a spell, and this spell is destroying our worlds. It's time to cast another spell, to call other worlds into being, to conjure other worlds within this world. The situation we find ourselves in now leaves us at the limits of language and grasping at the edges of imagination. We need art, experiment, and radical disruption to learn other ways to see, feel, and know. Consider this an invitation to experiment with ways of imagining a different kind of we for catalyzing action in the world. Step 1. Never forget this. We are not one. Say it again and again. We cannot forget to keep asking precisely who is hailed by this anthropos, that figure positioned at the helm of the Anthropocene. Anthropocenic rhetoric calls out man as the agent of his own demise and simultaneously vaults him into position as the only viable savior of the planet. We got ourselves into this mess, only humans can get us out. But even as Anthropocenic thinking attempts to call our attention to and finally hold us responsible for the effects of our actions, it still figures humans as a singular agent, transcendent over and separate from some Edenic nature in peril. These narratives recenter rather than decenter man as the agent with natural dominion over this planet's future. What we are witnessing is the climax of 500 years of colonial violence, extractive capitalism, white supremacy, misogyny, and the hubris of human exceptionalism. The Capitalocene and the Plantationocene are also excellent monikers to identify the forces that have been at work terraforming the planet. These destructive forces are propelled not by all people, but by those particularly egregious ways of doing life, modeled on the self-aggrandizing human. So remember this, not all are hailed by this figure or form of life. Capitalism and colonialism are not to be mistaken as natural or innate human existence. They are not inevitable consequences of human civilization, but they have catalyzed and conditioned our current predicament. Marisol de la Cadena calls our attention to those not seen, those whose lives and lands continue to be spent in the accumulation of wealth by colonial and neo-colonial powers. These are the people who remain targets of dispossession and enslavement, even, perhaps especially today, as capitalism gets into high gear in its efforts to go green and save the world. Don't believe the hype of sustainability rhetoric. The worlds built by colonialism and capitalism are unlivable for us all. So I think what she's saying here is that when we talk about the world as being formed by humans, as being endangered by humans, and what are we going to do to save the world, we're really putting humans again into the center. It's anthropocentric. We're putting humans in the center, making us the most important, the only intelligent life forms. But it's not everyone who's participated in creating the Anthropocene, in creating the world that we live in now, with a lot of perils, a lot of disruption, a lot of instability in ecosystems and cultural systems. That is specifically the Western capitalist, colonialist worldview that has pushed us to this place. And not everybody is driving that. A lot of people are caught up in the wake, but not everybody is driving that. So we need to remember that not all humans are participating in this way. All right, back to Natasha. Step 2, break this world to make other worlds possible. There's no way to mitigate anthropocenic violence using its same logic. So we have to refuse calls to design for the Anthropocene. These technological fixes that will keep us locked into the same rhythms of extraction and dispossession. Refuse to be lured into those climate change edutainment complexes like Singapore's Gardens by the Bay, whose gleaming glass, metal and concrete infrastructure and capital and labour-intensive design exquisitely exposes the ruse of sustainability as an aesthetic manoeuvre grounded in Edenic visions of nature. This is not the kind of green that will save us. Yes, there are already apocalypses going on all around us. The decimation of the boreal forest and all its relations to extract bitumen on stolen Indigenous land in Canada is one such apocalypse. But giving in to apocalyptic thinking is itself a kind of exit strategy, an easy out. Ruin porn, including those all too compelling images of plants rupturing through abandoned buildings in Chernobyl, thrives on this narrative of a world without us, this idea that the earth will be better off without people. Beware of such apocalyptic thinking. Anthropocenic thought catches us up in thrall of apocalypse and sets us to work, furtively dreaming the end of times. We must refuse a narrative arc that is bent on pulling the entire planet towards unstoppable catastrophe. Do not resign yourself into thinking that this is how it has to go down, as if apocalypse is precisely what will have been. Resist the lure of apocalypse like your life depends on it. It's easier to dream the end of the world than the end of capitalism. And so we must put serious effort into dreaming the end of capitalism and activating processes of decolonialization. There are as yet worlds to come, but which worlds will be livable? It's time to rethink the very constitution of we if we want to learn how to make worlds livable for all. So my thoughts on this point, that this line just landed like glass inside me, that it is easier to dream the end of the world than the end of capitalism. And isn't it just, right? That there is a pull towards dreaming about apocalypse, thinking about apocalypse. Movies and books are so enchanting when they're apocalyptic. And it's kind of it's an end to this confusing time of being unsure how to move and how to move through the challenges that we're facing. So Natasha here really encourages us to dream new livable worlds rather than apocalypse, to resist the lure of apocalyptic thinking like our life depends upon it, because maybe it does. Okay, back to Natasha. Step 3, repeat this mantra. We are not alone. We are not alone. We are not alone. Looking back at the past 500 years of efforts to assert Western man's independence from and power over nature, it is clear that we should never be trusted to act alone. Anthropocene thinking is so obsessed with man's independence, with unilateral action and autonomy, that it forgets that there are other forces and powers among us, including those with significantly better skills in the realm of world-making and planetary scale change. In some cases, these beings have billions of years more experience than us in terraforming livable worlds. Step 4, name our most powerful ally. Who made this planet livable and breathable for animals like us? Say it out loud. The photosynthetic ones. Photosynthetic organisms form a biogeochemical force of a magnitude that has not properly been grasped. More than 2 billion years ago, photosynthetic microbes spurred the event known today as the oxygen catastrophe. These creatures dramatically altered the composition of the atmosphere, choking out the ancient anaerobic ones with poisonous oxygen vapors. Photosynthesizers like cyanobacteria, algae, terrestrial plants, and trees are the planet's most powerful agents of elemental rearrangement. These green beings must be understood as practitioners of a kind of alchemical cosmic mattering. We think plants can't move, but they reach out across the cosmos, drawing the energy of the sun into their tissues so they can work their terrestrial magic. Pulling matter out of thin air, plants must be understood as world-making conjurers. They teach us the most nuanced lessons about matter and creation of material reality. More powerful than any factory or industrial plant, vast communities of photosynthetic creatures rearrange the elements on a planetary scale. They know how to compose livable, breathable, nourishing worlds on land and in the water. As they exhale, they compose the atmosphere. As they decompose, they matter the compost and feed the soil and the oceans. Holding the earth down and the sky up, the plants sing in nearly audible ultrasonic frequencies as they transpire, moving massive volumes of water from the depths of the earth up to the highest clouds. They cleanse the waters and heal the land while nourishing all other forms of life. And for those caught up in the thrall of an economy that fetishizes carbon, perhaps the most important art these creatures practice is sucking up with gusto the gaseous carbon emissions we humans generate so abundantly. To say that forests and marine microbes form the lungs of the earth is an understatement. They literally breathe us into being. All cultures turn around plants, metabolic rhythms. Plants are the substance, substrate, scaffolding, symbol, sign, and sustenance of political economies the world over. We must learn how to work with and for the plants so that we can be nourished and clothed and sheltered and pleasured and healed without destroying the earth. Plants are the world makers we need to heed if we hope to grow livable worlds. And our worlds will only be livable worlds when people learn how to conspire with the plants. All right, so that point, that double point, is the one that most deeply changed how I view the world. She's pointing us to understand there that when it comes to changing ecosystems, to building healthy worlds for mammals and creatures and plants, the plants are the experts, that they were here millions of years before us, and without the work that the plants did, we wouldn't actually have oxygen or soil, or things that form the foundation of our world, or rain. And so if we can just remember this, we can say, wow, the plants are already experts in this. What arrogance to think that it's all up to us right now to make it better. In fact, the plants, the forests are all over the world doing their magic work right now to trap carbon, rebuild soil, regulate rain systems, and oxygenate the air, right? Like they're already doing that. They've been doing that forever. So probably our biggest mistake was cutting down all the forests, but they're regrowing, Where I am sitting right now, I'm looking out the window at forest, but 30 years ago, it was just a bare hill, and now the forest has returned. And there's incredible force inside Gaia to return the forests to all places that they can be returned to. And so she's inviting us, rather than trying to think of how we can use our cleverness to get us out of the mess that we're in, rather than positioning human intelligence as the thing that's going to make the difference, that we learn to work with the plants and recognize them as agents of planetary change and world making. That landed so deeply for me. Step 5. Seed conspiracies with plants everywhere. Repeat this again and again. We are of the plants. Now, if this is true, then the figure that should ground our actions is not the arrogant anthropos, so much as a strangely hybrid figure we could call the planthropos. And now try wrapping your mouth around this word until it rolls off your tongue with ease. Planthropocene. Yes, it's awkward, and you will sound silly, but just give it a try. It's an aspiration that invites us to stage new scenes and new ways to see and seed plant-people relations in the here and now, not some distant future. And it's grounded in the wisdom of the ancient and ongoing radical solidarity projects that plants have already cultivated with their many peoples. Rather than avoiding the terrors that we face now, Planthropocenes invite us to root ourselves into a way of doing life that would break the frame of Anthropocenic logic. Planthropocenes point to the joint and uncertain futures of plants and peoples. We need to learn not just how to collaborate, but also how to conspire with the plants, to breathe with them. Remember this. What is good for plants is good for everyone else, human and non-human. Get on their side. Consider yourself at their service. Get to know plants intimately and on their terms. And be sure to tap into their desires for forms of life that are not for us. Support the plants' efforts to keep the earth cool and the waters cleansed. Give plants and their soils space and time to flourish outside of the rhythms of capitalist extraction and the chemical violence of industrial agriculture. Remember, they need their pollinators, they need their fungal relations, they need their animal allies. Above all, plants need humans to radically reconfigure how we stage our relations with them. Indeed, if plants are sun worshippers, perhaps we ought to be plant worshippers. A little reverence for the plants could go a long way. Invent rituals, start a local church for plant worship. Don't worry, reverence for plants doesn't mean you can't eat them, but it does mean it would be polite to thank them for their generosity. Just think, if you had to consult the plants to ask permission to use them, industrial agriculture, strip mining, clear cutting, and the expanding concrete of urban sprawl would be inconceivable. Just ask, and they will tell you. So perhaps you can see some of my work inside that point, right? When I read that and she writes so eloquently, I thought, oh, maybe I can do something in my work as a herbalist that is collaborating with the plants, that's listening to the plants, that's trying to do what the plants are asking rather than use the plants to do what I want to do. And of course, I still do that because I'm part of this system and this culture, right? We all are. So some compassion for ourselves is important too. But she's asking us to imagine what it might look like to see our role, especially as plant people and herbalists. You're listening to this podcast, you're a plant person. So, what would it look like to see our role as plant people as really important for getting us out of the mess we're in? Not because we have the magic answers, but because we can ally ourselves with the plants. We can work with the plants. We can listen to the plants, and we can encourage other people to listen to the plants and to remember the importance of plants in human life and in ecological life. What would that look like for you, I wonder? Step 6. Uproot colonial common sense. Decolonization means giving stolen land back to Indigenous peoples. Perhaps one step towards decolonization demands we disrupt the all too colonial common sense that shapes how we apprehend, that is, both how we see and how we seize both land and plants. Does talking to plants sound crazy to you? Consider this, just a handful of generations before you were born, your ancestors' lives were intimately entangled with plants. They knew how to cultivate and forage plants for nourishment, medicine, art, craft, and shelter. For millennia, people have been attentive to plants' powers and predilections, especially those whose lives and livelihoods get them tangled up with the plants and caught up in their spiraling whirl. There are gardeners, farmers, hunters, healers, herbalists, cooks, artists, naturalists, foresters, scientists, and shamans all over the world who consider plants as sentient beings worthy of address. Lots of people hear plants sing, though not necessarily in the audible registers you might anticipate. And at the same time, many people, perhaps even you, would think this is absurd. Sure, you read that story about plants in your Facebook feed, that science has confirmed that plant roots have a kind of swarm intelligence. But we don't need the disenchanting sciences to tell us what plant people have long known. What we need to do is make strange the disenchantment and skepticism we've inherited from those whose power was secured in part through policies and sciences designed to invalidate all other ways of knowing the world. It was the colonizers, of course, who refused to believe local and indigenous peoples' claims that the plant can sing. We have to remember that human exceptionalism is another colonial formation, one that violently evacuates the sentience of the more than human world around us. And so it's time to detune this colonial sensorium, which has such a hold on our perceptions and actions in the world. To do this, we need to upend everything we believe is common sense. Forget everything you thought you knew about the living world, especially what you believe is perceptible, imaginable, reasonable, legible, and meaningful. Refuse the disenchantments of a mechanistic science that renders more than human lives as alienable bits of life and death ready to be apportioned off as property, resource, or commodity. Sideline colonial and capitalist moral economies that dictate what is good, valuable, and true. Refuse to deride local and indigenous cosmologies and worldviews. Push back on every contortion or erasure or reduction of their knowledge that seeks to make such practices legible or rational to science. Do not appropriate Indigenous knowledges, but do the work to make yourself receptive and responsive so that you can take these knowledges seriously. Planthropocenes make space for other ways of knowing and storying the living world. Remember, there are people all over the world who have the protocols, the know-how, and the responsibility to consult the plants. Livable worlds need people who know how to talk to the plants. So, what Natasha's doing there, she's building on that previous point, and she's saying that inside the colonial capitalist extractive worldview that we have, this mechanistic science that reduces everything that's not human into little bits of life and death that we can buy and sell, inside that worldview, it seems crazy to imagine ourselves as talking to plants, listening to plants, collaborating with plants as sentient beings, right? And in fact, for most of us, I think if you're listening to this segment, then hopefully you've been on a journey with me around coming towards a deeper appreciation of this numinous and subtle way that plants can communicate with humans, and the reverence and sentience that these plants deserve to be recognized with, right? And yet inside us, there is still that voice that says, this is silly. Science has told us this isn't true. Even though we see bit by bit scientific analysis being like, oh, look, the plants are singing and making music. We did this test with all these weird sensors. And a bit later, it's like, oh, guess what? Plants are talking to each other and they're exchanging nutrients through the mycelium. Scientific analysis is learning more and more about the intelligence of plants and the way that they do respond to us and that we can hear them. And yet we don't need to rely on that scientific knowledge. Many other forms of viewing the world, many Indigenous worldviews, and even probably your own deep intuitive self knows that it's true, that plants are aware, that we can communicate that with them, that we can collaborate with them. And part of creating a livable world is fighting back inside ourselves against those voices that says, no, that's all gobbledygook, that's all woo-woo. And we need to advocate for the plant listeners. We need to advocate for people who have Indigenous wisdom inside them. We need to advocate for those worldviews that says, no, many different things are true. And in fact, the truth that is being told about the nature of the reality right now is a very dangerous one that has gotten us into some really tricky places. Step 7, vegetalize your sensorium. Once you've started to unsettle the colonial common sense that pervades your perceptions and attentions, it is time to vegetalize your sensorium so that you too can learn with and alongside the plants. As a co-conspirator supporting their world-making projects, you will need to apprentice with them. What do plants want? What do plants know? What can a plant do? We do not yet know, but you could reach toward them with the openness of not knowing and forget what you thought counts as knowledge. Consider this, your sensorium, your sensory capacity, especially your senses of color, texture, taste, touch, and smell, is already articulated by plant life. Their forms inspire your aesthetics, entrain your habitus, and excite your imagination. From this perspective, your senses have already been vegetalized, and yet there is still so much work to do to learn how to extend your synesthetic sensorium to meet their lively worlds. To awaken the latent plant in you, you'll need to get interested in the things that plants care about. Though they don't have eyes, ears, noses, or mouths, don't be fooled. They can sense in ways that allow them to see, hear, smell, taste, feel, and respond to the world. Let their planty sensitivities inflect your own. Tune in to the different ways they do time. Learn to follow their tempos, their rhythms. Pay attention to the ways they defy all too human notions of individuality, bodily integrity, subjectivity, and agency. Let the plants redefine what you mean by the terms sensing, sensitivity, and sentience, and by what you understand as a community and a relation. Let yourself be lured by their tropic turns, and you will soon acquire freshly vegetalized sensory dexterities. You can also cultivate your inner plant through incantations, hypnosis, meditation, or yoga. Vegetalization is possible because your body does not end at the skin. Your contours are not constrained by physical appearance. Your imagination generates more than mere mental images. Its reach extends through your entire sensory body. Imaginings carry an affective charge. They can excite your muscles, tissues, and fascia, heighten or alter your senses. Perceptual experiments can rearticulate your sensorium. And by imagining otherwise and telling different stories, you can open up to new, sensible worlds. You could also let the plants work directly on you. Cannabis and ayahuasca have been great allies for those seeking to palpate the sentience of the more than human world. But above all, involve yourself with plant life. Make space for plants to take root and take the time to watch them grow. Linger among them and let their sentiences and sensibilities alter your perception, how you think, and what you know. So now she's starting to get into instructions here, right? If we want to participate in the plant world, in this plant-human collaboration, we need to learn to listen to them. And to learn to listen to them, we have to awaken our innate capacity for what Stephen Harrod Buhner would call heart sensing. So if you haven't listened yet to my episode with Sky Cialita Flor from, I think it was January this year, a tribute to Stephen Harrod Buhner that we did together, we talk a lot about how to start heart sensing plants, how to turn on the capacity of the heart to use the imaginative faculty to listen to the plants and communicate with them. What she's talking about is expanding our senses, our sixth sense, if you will. And this is how we start to be able to hear the plants. But of course, she says you have to spend time in nature, spend time with the plants, and change our understanding of time. Plants live in a slower time scale than we do. And if we're just busy, rushing, thinking, we're never going to be able to develop this capacity. In fact, I think that's one of the biggest ways that we're hooked into these dangerous world tendencies we're in now, is we're so busy, we're so hooked into a busyness story, we're rushing so much, we're thinking so much, and in the small moments of downtime, we're absorbing so much of other people's thinking through social media. Step 8, take ecology off the grid. As you set to work disrupting colonial common sense and vegetalizing your sensorium, the world will start to look and feel a lot different. You may begin to sense things you've never perceived before. You may get the feeling that you are being watched everywhere you go. Indeed, the plants and trees are not indifferent to you. They are paying very close attention to all the beings that ingather around them. They know how to lure you and their other co-conspirators with force. Start with the plants. Follow their inquisitive growth, their running roots and rhizomes, the widespread movement of their pollen and seeds, and an entire ecology of beings, becomings, and processes of coming undone will soon become perceptible. Get caught up in the momentum that propels these beings into one another's lives, and you will soon start to perceive effective ecologies taking shape among the thicket of relations all around you. Cultivate modes of attention that allow you to perceive what matters to the plants and their co-conspirators. Becoming sensor, tune into this ecology of practices and practitioners. Follow the push and pull, the attractions and repulsions, the happenings taking shape in and around the plants. Get a feel for the ways that plants practice their arts at the cusp of life and death. Over time, you will begin to forget what you used to think nature was. You will forget how you used to think that life worked, and eventually you'll forget too the naturalizing tropes that made you believe that living beings work like machines, or that forests perform ecosystem services. Call out the colonial and capitalist desires of the ecological sciences. Beware of Anthropocene ecologies that reduce land care practices to resource management. Do ecology otherwise. Decolonising ecology in settler states like Canada, the US, and Australia means restoring Indigenous sovereignty and stewardship to stolen lands and making land-based reparations to Black communities living in the wake of slavery. In any Planthropocene, colonial governments must cede control over land management and make space for dispossessed communities to bring ceremony and healing to their lands and their bodies. The fires raging out of control across settler states are a direct result of the removal of Indigenous peoples from their lands and the genocidal suppression of their knowledge and practices, especially the art and ceremony of tending lands with fire. Indigenous knowledge keepers know how to conspire with fire to grow livable and nourishing worlds. Restoring Indigenous leadership to land stewardship is a form of harm reduction and climate action. These are the plant-people conspiracies that will save us. Step 9. Garden against Eden. Forget everything you thought a garden was and everything you thought a gardener was supposed to do. Your job is to stage scenes of plant-people conspiracy to keep this planet livable and breathable. Your primary commitment will be to support plant growth everywhere. Start by letting the plants grow where they want to. Let them break through concrete, root into every fissure and surface, grow through the holes in every fence. Don't be afraid of the plants. Remember, those plants we vilify as invasive species are here to teach us about the ravages of colonialism. The plants themselves are not evil. They grow where lands have been destroyed. They grow in sites of dispossession. They grow where lands and bodies are out of relation. Before we poison the earth with pesticides to eradicate non-native plants, or rip them out with relish and fury, we need to ask ourselves, what are they up to? What are they teaching us about colonialism and the ruins of capitalism? How can we conspire with them to heal lands and bodies, uproot the infrastructures of our anthropocenic cities? Give those old order infrastructures back to the plants and fungi, let them decompose. Wild urban plant growth certainly does portend the decline of empire, but in a Planthropocene, wild growth will not be read as a sign of ruin. Planthropocenic cities will be designed to support plant life everywhere. Each surface will offer an affordance, a place for plants to root and grow and decompose. Perhaps one day you will conspire with the plants to grow your own home. Perhaps cities will grow themselves into cooling forests brimming with nourishment. Humans will have to cede their biopolitical powers over lands and bodies. We will finally come to the realization that we are not the ones in control. So in step 8 and step 9 there, she's talking about the way that we do ecology and the way that we do gardens. And she's pointing to the fact that it's very easy to be walking in nature, be observing plant life, and still be trapped into that human control narrative where we're looking around and naming the plant parts or viewing what's happening in the ecosystem as a kind of mechanical unfolding, right? And that we can be looking at an environment and still seeing commodities, still seeing objects, still seeing machines. And we need to be changing our perception there to let the plants guide us and teach us what's happening. And with step 9, talking about that in the garden. As gardeners, we need to not garden in a way that's controlling the plants to be growing just here and just there in a way that's pleasing to humans, right? We need to be allowing at least some of the spaces of every garden to just be a wild space. The plants can do what they want. Yes, even if that means you've got a bunch of weeds just going crazy in the corner, the weeds are doing a job. They're rehabilitating the soil. And if you leave those weeds for long enough, then other plants will grow and you will start to allow the plants agency to do what they want on land. Step 10, make art for the Planthropocene. Refuse the aesthetics of ruin porn, which constrains our imaginations about wild growth to sites of cultural decay, as if it is only in the wake of human extinction that plants will be able to express their full, unfettered, or shall we say monstrous, powers. Cultivate instead a taste for Planthropocene porn, art that keeps people in the game by staging intimate relations between plants and people. Art that figures nature as lover, art that lures us into the realm of more than human pleasures. Curate your own ecosexual bathhouse and make love with the plants. Join Slovenian artist Spela Petric in the plant sex consultancy to design vibrators for lonely potted plants and flowers who have lost their pollinators. Join artists from Dance for Plants to create performances for the potted plants that are slow dancing on the window ledges of your apartment. Apprentice with Mexican artist Gilberto Esparza to design lively nomadic plant support systems. Build the bodies of your planimal machines from electronic waste harvested from the ruins of capitalism and engineer them to draw their energy from bacterial life. Whatever you do, conspire with the plants to make art like your life depends on disrupting the colonial common sense that would leave us all to die in the Anthropocene. She's talking about the fact that life follows art. When we make art, music, stories, novels, movies, dance performances that is about that plant-human relationship, that sings it up. We're actually singing it into being. Again, creating that shift in our understanding. When we make art for the plants, we are also then changing the narrative about sentience and agency. So art about the plant-human relationship and art for the plant starts to unweave these colonial extractive narratives from our brain. So that's the end of the article. If you got this far, then I salute you because it's a lot of beautiful writing, but very complex writing. And she's doing something powerful here. She is describing some steps for how we start to break down the inner architecture of the world that we live in. And that's where it starts. So if you're a plant person, if you have started some of this work yourself, changing the way that you look at plants and think about plants and interact with plants, even started doing some plant listening, then you are already actively collaborating with the plant world to make a livable world for all our relations. And I thank you so much for that. We need to speak about this work that we're doing because that helps us to feel strong in the work that we're doing, to sing up a new world. And together we can do it with the plants. That's it for this moon cycle. Thanks for joining me in another layer of this fascinating conversation we are having about the role of the sacred in our lives as herbalists. If you know someone who would love this episode, then send it through to them, as our work strengthening our herbal community through grassroots herbal education starts right here. I'll see you next time the moon is round in the sky, and until then, I wish you good health and many plants.